The night sky above Earth was a silent expanse, the stars scattered like shards of glass across a velvet abyss. But that silence fractured with the arrival of the message, a chilling beacon of hostility, cutting through the cosmos like a blade. It reached Earth's satellites first, a dense wave of encoded noise, and then spread like wildfire through every channel humanity possessed. Inside the United Earth Council's war room, the air was electric with dread. Screens blinked erratically, their holographic displays forming and dissolving around the vast chamber. Commander Elias Vahn stood at the center, his sharp features illuminated by the cold blue glow of the central monitor. His dark eyes, like storm clouds, remained fixed on the pulsating alien glyphs as they unraveled into words. "Replay it," Elias commanded, his voice a low growl. A mechanical voice, emotionless yet dripping with condescension, filled the room. "Earthlings, your defiance is futile. You are an aberration, a minor disruption in the grand sequence. Surrender now, or be extinguished." The final words, "be extinguished," hung in the air like smoke after a blast, choking the room of its prior certainty. No one spoke. The diplomats, scientists, and generals seated around the massive circular table exchanged nervous glances, their earlier debates drowned in the enormity of the moment. Elias finally broke the silence. "How far?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Lieutenant Aiden Cole, the lead tactical officer, straightened at his station. His auburn hair was damp with sweat, his hands twitching against the sleek controls. 12 days, sir. Maybe less if their fleet accelerates." "Less." Elias spat the word like it tasted foul. He turned to the room, his gaze sweeping over each face. 12 days. That's all the time we have to decide the fate of our planet. We don't have the luxury of waiting. Before anyone could respond, a tall, wiry man in a silver diplomatic sash stood. His voice quivered with a controlled veneer of authority. "Commander Vahn, let us consider. These beings may yet be reasoned with. Their hostility could be posturing." Elias's lip curled. "Posturing? That's your interpretation of 'be extinguished'?" He leaned forward, his presence heavy and magnetic. "We've seen this before. The Vrax Accord, the Sarin collapse. Alien diplomacy ends the same way. Devastation. This is not a debate. It's an ultimatum." The diplomats started to object, but another voice interjected. Deep and gravelly, it belonged to General Isaac Lang. The grizzled veteran was a towering presence, even seated, his calloused hands gripping the table's edge. "Elias is right. The Aroxans don't negotiate, they assimilate. We can't afford to treat this as anything less than total war." Outside, distant sirens began to wail, a warning system being tested for what would come. The sound seeped into the room, a haunting underscore to their deliberations. Dr. Ilara Mehta, Earth's foremost physicist, adjusted her glasses and spoke, her voice measured but edged with urgency. "Their fleet operates on principles we barely comprehend. Plasma vectors, subspace conduits. If we don't start preparing now, nothing we have will stand against them." Elias nodded, his expression hardening into stone. "Exactly. Which is why we're not starting with what we have." His voice dropped lower, commanding silence. "We're starting with what we've hidden." The room's murmurs stopped. Ilara's brows furrowed. "You're talking about the graveyard," she said, barely above a whisper. Elias gave a grim smile. "I am." The graveyard was a name spoken in military circles with a mixture of reverence and trepidation. It referred to the decommissioned fleet buried deep beneath Earth's crust, a relic of earlier, bloodier wars. These ships were outdated, their systems analog and their weapons primitive by modern standards. Yet their designs were raw power incarnate, hulls built to endure, guns meant to obliterate. General Lang chuckled darkly. "Bringing out the dinosaurs, huh?" "Dinosaurs won't see us coming," Elias replied. "The Aroxans expect us to fight them with our best tech. They won't anticipate weapons older than their invasion plans." "Bold," Ilara said, her tone cautious. But even if we bring them online, we're looking at weeks of retrofitting. Then we make weeks out of days, Elias interrupted, his voice steel. I'll need you to prioritize energy shielding on those ships. Forget finesse. We need brute force. Aiden Cole shifted in his seat, his gaze darting between Elias and the holographic projection of the Aroxan fleet. And our orbital defenses? If we leave the skies open? They're bait, Elias said flatly. We'll draw the Aroxans in, stretch their lines, and strike from the graveyard. But none of this happens if we waste another second debating. A burst of static cut through their discussion. The central monitor flickered, displaying the same alien glyphs. The message repeated, this time with a darker tone, the mechanical voice louder, sharper. Earthlings, this is your final warning. Prepare to submit or be reduced to silence. Silence. The words slammed into the room like a cannon blast, and for a moment, the weight of it was unbearable. Elias exhaled slowly. He had seen the aftermath of silence on other worlds, planets scorched, cultures erased, lives rendered meaningless. That would not be Earth's story. Not while he still drew breath. Broadcast this back, Elias ordered, his jaw tightening. Let them hear our response. The communications officer hesitated but complied, activating the global relay. Elias stepped forward, his voice resonating with unflinching defiance. This is Commander Elias Vahn of Earth. You've made your intentions clear. Now hear ours. We will not surrender. We will not fall. And we will not be silent. If you want war, come, but prepare to pay for it. The message ended. The room remained eerily quiet as the echoes of Elias's words faded into the hum of the monitors. Outside, the sirens had stopped, leaving only the distant roar of the ocean against the cliffs near the council building. Elias straightened and turned back to the table. 12 days, he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Prepare everything. I'll personally oversee the graveyard's activation. As the room began to stir into action, Ilara approached him, her gaze searching. You're not just preparing for war, are you? Elias's eyes met hers, dark and unwavering. No, he said. I'm preparing for the end of it. Outside, the sky remained indifferent, the stars twinkling as though unaware of the storm brewing beneath them. But for the first time in centuries, Earth's future was no longer in their hands. It was in the hands of those ready to wield it. And Elias intended to wield it like a sword. The silence in the war room was a fragile thing, stretched thin over the clamor of preparation. As Elias Vahn stepped out into the corridor, his boots echoing on the polished stone floor, the cold air bit at his skin. The weight of his words, prepare for the end of it, hung around his neck like an iron collar. He didn't have time for second guesses or doubts. 12 days were slipping through his fingers like grains of sand, and the Aroxans weren't waiting. The sky outside the Council's fortress gleamed with artificial constellations, Earth's orbital defenses shimmering faintly in the night. Massive weapons platforms floated in formation, their gunmetal hulls glinting as the first rays of dawn kissed the horizon. Elias paused for a moment, staring at the sky with an expression that wavered between defiance and quiet fear. The scent of ozone lingered in the cool morning air, a byproduct of the fortress's defense grid cycling to life. He closed his eyes briefly and breathed it in. It smelled like a challenge. Commander Vahn, a voice called, sharp and familiar. Elias turned to see Major Julian Kane jogging toward him, his uniform rumpled and his face lined with exhaustion. Kane was a man who carried chaos like a badge of honor, his every movement deliberate, yet unpredictable. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the cold, and the scent of burnt metal clung to him, evidence of long hours in the simulation chambers. "They're here," Kane said, his voice low and urgent. "Aroxan scouts, just outside our defense perimeter." The words hit Elias like a hammer. "So they're testing us," he muttered. "They want to know how we'll react. They'll know soon enough." Kane's grin was sharp, almost feral. "Orbital defenses are on standby. Your orders?" Elias's mind raced, calculating possibilities as if moving pieces on a chessboard. "We need to draw them in. Don't fire unless they breach the perimeter. Let them think we're hesitant." "Hesitant?" Kane raised an eyebrow, his amusement poorly disguised. "Not exactly your style, Commander." "It's not hesitation," Elias said coolly. "It's bait." Kane gave a short laugh, though his eyes remained tense. "Understood. I'll make sure the trigger fingers are steady." As Kane disappeared down the corridor, Elias made his way to the observation deck. The glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, offering an unbroken view of the stars and the dark silhouettes moving against them. A faint hum of energy coursed through the room, vibrating against his fingertips as he leaned on the railing. The Aroxan scout ships were sleek and angular, like obsidian shards slicing through the void. Elias's communicator crackled to life. "Commander," came the voice of Captain Risa Nakamura, sharp and clear despite the static. "We're tracking them. 5 ships. They're maintaining formation. No deviations yet." "Let them approach," Elias said, his tone clipped. "We need to see how far they'll come before they reveal their hand." Risa hesitated, her breath audible over the line. "Understood. But if they decide to fire first, we'll have little time to respond." Elias didn't answer immediately. He stared at the Aroxan ships, watching them glide closer like predators stalking prey. "Then we'd better make the most of the time we have." The hours stretched, each one heavier than the last. Inside the graveyard, the air was thick with the acrid smell of lubricant and scorched metal. Sparks flew as welders worked frantically, the sharp crackle of energy cutting through the din. Engineers shouted over the noise, their hands blackened with grease as they coaxed the ancient war machines to life. The ships loomed like sleeping giants, their hulking frames rusted but unyielding. Dr. Ilara Mehta moved through the chaos with precision, her tablet casting a pale glow on her face as she barked orders to her team. "Check the magnetic stabilizers again," she snapped, her voice rising above the clamor. "If those fail during combat, we're dead in the water." Elias entered the bay, the heavy scent of industrial chemicals hitting him like a wave. The temperature was stifling, and his shirt clung to his back. He approached Ilara, his voice cutting through the noise. "How long until they're combat ready?" Ilara didn't look up. "You're asking for miracles, Elias. These ships are older than my grandfather. We're patching them with duct tape and prayer." "That wasn't an answer," Ilara sighed, finally meeting his gaze. 48 hours for basic functionality. 72 for anything resembling combat efficiency." "Make it 36, Elias said flatly. "The Aroxans aren't waiting for us to get comfortable." Her eyes flashed with frustration, but she nodded. 36. But when these ships fall apart mid-battle, I'm holding you responsible." "They won't," Elias said, the weight of his certainty almost tangible. "Because they can't." On the observation deck, the quiet hum of machinery was broken by a sharp alarm. Red lights flared across the control panels, bathing the room in a crimson glow. The scouts had crossed the perimeter. "Commander," Risa's voice came through the communicator, urgent and steady. "The Aroxans are making their move." Elias clenched his jaw, the taste of adrenaline bitter on his tongue. "Hold fire until my mark." The Aroxan ships accelerated, their dark forms blurring as they broke formation. Energy readings spiked, their weapon systems charging with a ferocity that sent shivers down Elias's spine. The hum in the observation deck deepened, vibrating against his chest like the rumble of distant thunder. "They're targeting our orbital platforms," Risa said, her voice tightening. "If we don't—" "Now," Elias interrupted. "Fire." The void ignited. Plasma bolts tore through the darkness, searing arcs of light that painted the sky in brilliant flashes. Earth's orbital defenses roared to life, their cannons unleashing a relentless barrage. The first Aroxan ship was hit dead on, its sleek frame erupting into a cascade of fiery debris. But the others were faster. They weaved through the onslaught, their return fire slicing through the platforms with surgical precision. The explosions that followed were deafening, a symphony of destruction that vibrated through the bones of the station. "Status report!" Elias barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've lost 2 platforms," Risa said, her voice grim. "Another's barely holding. We're outmatched." Elias's fist tightened around the railing. The acrid stench of burning circuits filled the air, mingling with the sharp tang of sweat and fear. "Deploy the decoy drones," he ordered. Redirect their fire. We need more time. The drones launched in perfect synchronization, their small, reflective surfaces scattering into a swarm that shimmered like falling stars. The Aroxans hesitated, their targeting systems thrown into disarray. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. "Focus fire on the lead scout," Elias commanded. "Take it down." The combined assault was devastating. The lead Aroxan ship faltered, its shields collapsing in a cascade of sparks. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then it exploded, a blinding inferno that consumed the surrounding void. The remaining scouts retreated, their sleek forms vanishing into the abyss. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than the destruction they'd left behind. Elias stared at the wreckage, his chest rising and falling with the weight of what had just occurred. This was just the beginning, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The air smelled of smoke and victory, but it was a hollow triumph. The Aroxans weren't done, and neither was he. The command center was a quiet storm of tension. The holographic displays hummed with faint, flickering light, casting eerie shadows across the room. Elias Vahn stood at the helm, arms crossed, his jaw taut with barely contained frustration. The recent clash with the Aroxan scouts had been a victory, but it had cost more than he could stomach. Orbital platforms now drifted in ruin above Earth, their charred remains a grim testament to the ferocity of their enemy. The bitter tang of stale coffee lingered in the air, a reminder of how little rest anyone had found. Elias's gaze sharpened as the doors hissed open behind him. Dr. Ilara Meda strode in, her dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Her eyes were tired but sharp, gleaming with the urgency of someone who knew their time was dwindling. She carried a tablet cradled in one arm, the screen alive with schematics that pulsed in sync with her rapid steps. "This better be good," Elias said, his voice low and sharp as steel. "It's not good," Ilara shot back, dropping the tablet onto the console in front of him. The screen expanded, projecting a detailed model of an Aroxan cruiser. Its sleek, predatory shape seemed to radiate menace, even in miniature. "It's worse. They're using a decentralized command network, one we've never seen before." Elias's brow furrowed as he leaned closer, scanning the intricate pathways that connected the ship's systems. Meaning we can't just take out their flagship and expect the rest of their fleet to collapse, Ilara said, exhaling sharply. "Every ship acts as part of a collective. They adapt in real time, compensating for losses instantly. It's a hive mind." "Perfect," Elias muttered, the word heavy with sarcasm. "And here I was hoping for something simple." "Simple doesn't win wars," Ilara said, her tone clipped. She tapped the tablet, shifting the display to a series of waveforms. "But there's a vulnerability. Their hive network relies on subspace frequencies to maintain cohesion. If we can disrupt those frequencies, we can sever their coordination," Elias finished, his mind already leaping ahead. "How?" Ilara hesitated. "We've been working on a prototype, a subspace wave disruptor. It's untested, and the energy requirements are problematic. We'd need to be dangerously close to their fleet for it to work." "How close?" She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Close enough to count their gun ports." Elias let out a slow breath, the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. "And if it works?" "If it works," Ilara said, her voice tinged with grim hope, "we cripple their fleet's ability to fight as a unit, but the odds of survival for whoever deploys it—" "Noted," Elias interrupted. He straightened, his focus narrowing. "We'll figure out the logistics later. For now, keep working on it. I want that thing operational." As Ilara nodded and turned to leave, Elias's communicator crackled to life. "Commander," came the familiar voice of Major Julian Kane, rough and urgent. "You're going to want to see this." Minutes later, Elias stood in the bowels of the graveyard, the cavernous hangar filled with the sharp tang of ozone and the deafening clang of machinery. Massive floodlights cast stark shadows across the hulking frames of the old warships. The graveyard was alive with movement, engineers scurrying between gantries, sparks showering like molten rain as welders labored to breathe life into relics of a bygone era. Kane stood near the base of one of the ships, his broad frame silhouetted against its colossal hull. His expression was grim as he gestured for Elias to follow him inside. The two men climbed a series of narrow ladders and entered the ship's bridge, its dim interior a maze of exposed wiring and outdated consoles. The air was thick with dust, the metallic scent sharp and almost suffocating. "You brought me here for a reason," Elias said, breaking the silence. Kane didn't reply immediately. Instead, he pressed a button on the nearest console, and a holographic recording flickered to life. It showed a fragment of an intercepted Aroxan transmission, the alien glyphs rapidly translating into Earth's script. Elias's eyes narrowed as he read the message. "They're talking about the artifact," he said, his voice taut with disbelief. "How the hell do they know about it?" "That's the question," Kane said, his tone laced with unease. "This isn't just a war for territory or resources, Commander. They're after something specific. The artifact. A relic unearthed decades ago beneath the lunar surface. Its origins and purpose a mystery even to Earth's brightest minds. It had been sealed away, locked under the strictest security protocols, its significance deemed too dangerous to explore further. And now, somehow, the Aroxans knew. Elias clenched his fists, his mind racing. If they want it that badly, it means it's a threat to them. And if it's a threat to them, it's an opportunity for us. Or a death sentence, Kane said darkly. We don't even know what it does. We don't need to, Elias said, his voice hardening. We just need to keep it out of their hands. The thought lingered, heavy and oppressive, as they exited the ship. The graveyard's din grew louder, the cacophony of preparation, an unsettling counterpoint to the quiet desperation gnawing at Elias's resolve. Above them, the hull of an ancient battleship gleamed faintly in the harsh light, its massive cannons still intact. It looked like a creature from a forgotten age, awakened for one last fight. Do you think they're afraid of us? Kane asked suddenly, his voice low. Elias glanced at him, his expression unreadable. No, he said finally, but they should be. The following hours were a blur of activity. Engineers raced to retrofit the ancient ships, their hands slick with sweat and oil. Pilots trained in simulators, the hum of the machines vibrating through the floors. And deep within the command center, Elias pored over tactical maps, his mind dissecting every possible scenario. Outside, the night fell again, the stars cold and distant. The Aroxan fleet loomed just beyond the edges of Earth's sensors, an invisible storm building on the horizon. The air itself seemed heavier, as if the planet were holding its breath. Elias stood alone on the observation deck, his reflection ghostly in the glass. The faint scent of coffee lingered on his breath, a poor substitute for sleep. His thoughts churned, filled with fragments of plans and unanswered questions. The artifact, the disruptor, the ships. Every piece of the puzzle seemed fragile, ready to shatter under the slightest pressure, but beneath the doubt, a fire burned. This was his world, his fight, and he would see it through no matter the cost. The stars beyond the glass seemed to pulse, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Elias stared at them, unblinking, his fingers curling into fists. Somewhere out there the Aroxans were waiting, confident in their inevitable victory. He allowed himself a small, bitter smile. Let them wait, he muttered. They have no idea what's coming. The first tremors of the approaching Aroxan fleet were not visible to the naked eye, but felt through the intricate sensors embedded in Earth's orbital grid. A faint vibration ran through the command center, subtle yet menacing, as though the air itself had become a taut wire trembling with anticipation. Elias Vahn stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the holographic display showing Earth and the cold void beyond, where the Aroxans moved like shadows, swallowing the stars. The room buzzed with controlled chaos. Officers barked commands over the hum of machinery, their voices rising above the constant rhythm of incoming data streams. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of overheated electronics, mingling with the faint, bitter scent of adrenaline-fueled sweat. Every detail of the atmosphere seemed amplified, from the flickering screens to the faint vibration of power conduits beneath their feet. "They're coming into range," Aiden Cole reported, his voice tight, as he pointed at a cluster of red markers growing closer on the display. 15 ships on the front line, heavy cruisers with escort squadrons. And that, he gestured toward a larger shape emerging from the cluster, must be their flagship. Elias narrowed his eyes, the faint glow of the display painting his face in cold, pale light. It's bigger than I expected. Everything they do is bigger, Ilara Mehta said from the console beside him. Her voice was steady, but her hands moved with precision born of urgency, calibrating the subspace wave disruptor's prototype. But bigger also means slower. That's our edge. If we survive long enough to use it, Kane muttered from across the room, his tone laced with dry humor. He leaned against the tactical map, his dark eyes scanning the markers with practiced calculation. They're going to hit hard, Commander. We'd better be ready to hit harder. Elias nodded, his mind racing. He felt the weight of every decision pressing down on him, each choice branching into countless consequences. Are the decoys in position? Affirmative. Risa Nakamura's voice came through the comms, sharp and clear. Decoy fleet is holding near Sector Epsilon. Once they're engaged, we'll fall back and lead them toward the graveyard. Good, Elias said. And the ground batteries? Online and ready, Aiden replied. They won't stop the main fleet, but they'll keep the smaller ships occupied. Elias took a slow, deliberate breath, the cool air filling his lungs. He turned to Ilara. What's the status on the disruptor? She hesitated, glancing at him with a rare flicker of doubt. It's operational, but the targeting systems are still finicky. We'll have to aim manually, and even then, there's no guarantee it'll work on the first shot. It only needs to work once, Elias said, his voice firm. Position it on the Ardent and keep it cloaked until I give the order. We'll use the chaos of the decoys to get it close enough. Ilara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. Understood. Elias straightened, addressing the entire room. His voice carried over the din, calm and commanding. This is it. Everything we've done has led to this moment. If we hold them here, we buy Earth a future. If we fail, there won't be anything left to protect. Remember your roles. Trust the plan. And above all, his gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of each officer. Make them regret ever thinking they could take us. The response was silent but palpable, a wave of focused determination spreading through the room. The team snapped back to their stations, their movements precise and purposeful. Elias watched them for a moment, pride and a grim sense of responsibility warring within him. Then he turned back to the display. Let's bring the fight to them. The first engagement was a cacophony of fire and light. Earth's decoy fleet, composed of smaller, retrofitted vessels, surged forward to meet the Aroxan advance. From the observation deck, Elias watched the battle unfold, the vast emptiness of space alight with streaks of plasma and the sharp bursts of missile detonations. The ships moved with deadly grace, weaving through the chaos with calculated precision. Decoys are holding their line, Risa's voice crackled through the comms. But the Aroxans aren't taking the bait completely. Their flagship is hanging back. They're testing us, Elias said, his brow furrowing. He could almost feel the cold, analytical minds of the Aroxan commanders as they probed for weaknesses. Push them harder. Deploy drones from the Ardent to reinforce the decoys. Copy that, Risa replied. On the battlefield, the Ardent, a hulking relic of Earth's past wars, loomed like a sleeping giant. Its battered hull bristled with missile launchers and railguns, its systems painstakingly restored by Ilara and her team. The ship moved into position, its engines rumbling with barely contained power. Commander! Ilara's voice broke through the comms. We're in position. Cloaking field is active. Hold your fire, Elias ordered. Wait for my signal. The decoys began to falter under the relentless assault, their shields flickering as plasma rounds found their marks. Elias watched with a clenched jaw, every instinct screaming at him to act, but he held back, waiting for the right moment. They're moving in, Aiden reported, his voice taut. Flagship is advancing. Elias's heart pounded, the sound echoing in his ears like distant thunder. The Aroxan flagship loomed larger on the display, its angular design radiating menace. It was a beast, bristling with weaponry, that could reduce entire cities to ash. "Risa," Elias said, his voice low. "Fall back. Lead them toward the graveyard." "Understood," she replied. "We're on the move." The decoy fleet broke formation, retreating in a calculated maneuver that left the Aroxan ships exposed. The enemy followed, their confidence evident in their relentless pursuit. The flagship moved with an almost predatory grace, its weapons glowing ominously. "Now," Elias said, his voice sharp. The Ardent uncloaked, its massive cannons firing in unison. The disruptor hummed to life, its energy field rippling through space like a tidal wave. For a moment, the Aroxan fleet hesitated, their formations faltering as their systems struggled to adapt. "Disruptor deployed," Ilara reported. "But we've got incoming fire." The flagship retaliated, its plasma cannons unleashing a blinding barrage. The Ardent shook violently under the assault, its shields straining against the onslaught. "Hold your ground," Elias said, his voice unwavering. "We're not done yet." The disruptor fired again, its energy wave rippling outward. This time, the effect was immediate. The Aroxan ships flickered, their movements erratic as their hive network destabilized. One by one they began to falter, their weapons silencing as confusion spread through their ranks. "We've got them," Aiden said, his voice almost disbelieving. "Not yet," Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the flagship, its weapons still active despite the chaos. "Focus all fire on that ship. Take it down." The Ardent unleashed its full arsenal, its missiles and railguns tearing into the flagship's hull. Explosions rippled across its surface, a chain reaction of destruction that sent debris spiraling into the void. As the flagship's lights dimmed, the remaining Aroxan ships began to retreat, their cohesion shattered. The battlefield fell silent, the void now littered with the remnants of war. Elias exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing, but not disappearing entirely. The victory was hard fought, but he knew it was only temporary. The Aroxans would regroup. They always did. "Commander," Ilara's voice came through, weary but triumphant. "We did it." "For now," Elias said, his voice quiet. His gaze drifted to the stars, where the faint outline of the retreating fleet disappeared into the darkness. "But this isn't over. Not yet." The debris field hung in orbit like a scar etched into the stars. Shattered fragments of Earth's decoys and the hulking remnants of Aroxan warships drifted in silence, their twisted forms illuminated by the faint glow of the planet below. Inside the command center, the air was thick with tension, every breath weighted with the knowledge that this fragile victory was merely a prelude to what came next. Elias Vahn stood at the center of it all, his broad shoulders squared against the crushing burden of what lay ahead. The cold light of the holographic display bathed his face, deepening the shadows under his eyes. He stared at the tactical map, his fingers gripping the edge of the console. The retreating Aroxan fleet was marked in red, moving with unnerving precision toward a point deep in the outer system. "They're regrouping," Ilara Meta said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Her hands danced across her console, pulling up scans of the enemy movements. "And they're doing it fast. Whatever disruption we caused won't hold for long." "We bought time," Elias replied, his tone clipped, though his voice carried a faint edge of weariness. "Now we need to make it count." Aiden Cole leaned over the adjacent console, his brow furrowed as he analyzed the data. "They've repositioned near the Ort Gate. That's a tactical blind spot for us. If they consolidate their forces there—" "They'll steamroll us," Kane finished, his voice grim as he crossed his arms. He paced behind Elias, his boots striking the floor with a rhythmic thud. "The next wave will be the last. They'll come back stronger, angrier. We won't get another chance like this." Elias turned to the room, his gaze sharp. "Then we won't let them come to us. We take the fight to them." A silence settled over the command center, broken only by the faint hum of machinery. The words were bold, reckless even, but there was no mistaking the steel in Elias's tone. His team exchanged glances, their doubt tempered by the trust they had come to place in him. "How?" Ilara asked finally, folding her arms. "Even with the disruptor, We don't have enough firepower to take on their entire fleet." Elias's lips pressed into a thin line. He turned back to the holographic display, expanding the map to reveal the artifact's location beneath the lunar surface. The lines of the map glowed faintly, as if the moon itself held its breath. "The artifact," he said simply. Ilara's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. We don't even know what it does." "We know it terrifies them," Elias said, his voice steady. "That's enough for me." Risa Nakamura's voice crackled through the comms, breaking the tension. "Commander, I've reviewed the scans you sent. If the Aroxans are this focused on the artifact, it's because they see it as a weapon, one they don't want us using." "Then it's time we did," Elias said. He turned to Ilara. "I need you to prep a team to excavate the artifact and make it operational, whatever it takes." "That's assuming we can even move it," Ilara countered. "It's been buried for decades, and its systems are completely alien. If I can't—" "You will," Elias interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "You have to." Ilara hesitated, then nodded, though her unease was clear. "I'll need time, and resources." "You'll have both," Elias said. He turned to Aiden. "Coordinate with ground forces on Luna. I want that site secured by the time Ilara's team arrives." "And the fleet?" Kane asked, his arms still crossed. "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Elias said. He zoomed in on the tactical map, highlighting the Aroxan fleet's current position near the Ort Gate. "The disruptor will buy us a window. Risa's squadron will provide cover, while the graveyard fleet holds their attention." Kane frowned. "You're planning to take the Ardent right into their teeth, aren't you?" Elias met his gaze, his expression unflinching. "It's the only way to get Ilara the time she needs." A slow grin spread across Kane's face, equal parts admiration and disbelief. "You're insane." "Insane works," Elias replied, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Within hours, the operation was underway. The graveyard fleet, battered but functional, began its slow advance toward the Ort Gate. The ships moved with a deliberate grace, their ancient hulls reflecting the dim light of the distant sun. Inside the Ardent, the air was thick with the scent of oil and ozone, the low hum of its engines vibrating through the decks. Engineers shouted orders, their voices echoing through the narrow corridors as they made final preparations. Elias stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the fleet's formation take shape. The stars beyond the viewport seemed cold and indifferent, a stark contrast to the fiery determination that burned in his chest. "Disruptors online," Ilara's voice came through the comms. "Still no guarantees it'll hold." "It will," Elias said. "Just make sure you're ready to fire when the time comes." On Luna, Ilara's team worked tirelessly, their hands moving with a mix of precision and urgency as they unearthed the artifact. The moon's surface was harsh and silent, the faint crunch of boots on regolith, the only sound beneath the distant hum of excavation equipment. The artifact itself was massive, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse faintly with an inner light. "What are you?" Ilara murmured under her breath as she studied the alien device. Her fingers brushed against its surface, and a faint vibration ran through the ground as though the artifact were alive. "Commander," Risa's voice broke through the comms. "We've got movement. Aroxan ships incoming." Elias straightened, his jaw tightening. "All units, hold your positions. Let them come to us." The Aroxan fleet emerged from the void like predators scenting blood, their sleek forms gliding into formation. The Ardent fired first, its railguns lighting up the darkness with brilliant streaks of molten energy. The disruptor hummed to life, its wave rippling through space and sending the Aroxan ships into momentary disarray. "Now, Ilara," Elias said, his voice sharp. "Activate it." On Luna, Ilara's team worked frantically to bring the artifact online. The patterns on its surface glowed brighter, their rhythm quickening as if responding to her touch. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "It's charging," Ilara said, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "But I don't know what it's going to do." "Whatever it does," Elias said, his eyes fixed on the Aroxan flagship bearing down on the Ardent. "It's our last shot." The artifact pulsed, a blinding light erupting from its core and racing across the void. The Aroxan ships froze, their sleek forms caught in the wave of energy. One by one they began to disintegrate, their hulls crumbling into ash as the light consumed them. On the Ardent, silence fell as the battlefield cleared. The stars reappeared, cold and distant once more, as the last remnants of the Aroxan fleet vanished into nothingness. Elias exhaled, the tension in his chest easing for the first time. But the light from the artifact continued to pulse, its rhythm growing faster, more erratic. "Ilara," he said, his voice tight. "What's happening?" Her voice came through quiet and trembling. "I don't think it's stopping." The artifact pulsed like a living heart, its rhythm growing frantic, the patterns on its surface shifting in chaotic spirals of light. The lunar excavation site was bathed in an otherworldly glow, casting jagged shadows across the barren surface. Dr. Ilara Mehta stared at the device, her breath caught in her throat. The hum had deepened into a low-frequency tremor, reverberating through the ground and up into her chest, as if the moon itself was vibrating with anticipation or dread. "Ilara, what's happening?" Elias Vahn's voice crackled through the comms, sharp and commanding, yet tinged with an urgency that betrayed the gravity of the situation. "It's destabilizing," Ilara said, her voice trembling. "I don't think it was meant to be activated like this. The energy it's releasing—" She paused, her hands hovering over the artifact, unsure whether to try to stop it or let it run its course. "It's accelerating. I don't know if we can contain it." On the Ardent, Elias stood rigid, his gaze locked on the tactical display. The artifact's energy signature was spreading across the system like wildfire, a cascading wave of light and radiation that consumed everything in its path. The remnants of the Aroxan fleet were gone, their sleek warships reduced to drifting particles, but the artifact didn't stop. Its energy reached out, clawing toward the distant Ort Gate where the rest of the Aroxan forces waited. "Is it targeting them?" Aiden Cole asked, his voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. The lights of the bridge reflected in his wide eyes. "Or is it targeting everything?" Elias didn't answer immediately. His jaw clenched, and his hand tightened on the edge of the console. "Ilara, can you shut it down?" "I don't think it's a weapon," Ilara said, almost to herself. Her fingers traced the glowing patterns now too bright to look at directly. "It's responding. It's alive. And it's deciding something." "Deciding what?" Elias demanded. Ilara swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "Whether we're worth sparing." The words sent a chill down Elias's spine. For a moment, the hum of the artifact seemed to drown out everything else, even his thoughts. He stared at the display, at the growing wave of destruction, and felt the crushing weight of realization settle over him. "We lit the match," he muttered, his voice low. "Now it's deciding if it wants to burn everything." Kane's voice cut through the tension, rough and unapologetic. "Then let's give it a reason not to." Elias turned to face him, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Kane stepped forward, his expression as hard as stone. "We didn't come this far, fight this hard, just to let some ancient device decide we're not good enough," Kane said, his voice rising. "You've been telling us all along that we fight for a reason, for our people, our world. So let's show it who we are." Elias held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, his voice steadied, his resolve hardening like tempered steel. "Ilara, whatever it's doing, we need to send a message through it. Make it understand." Ilara blinked, her mind racing. "You're talking about a direct interface. Commander, this isn't a computer, it's alive," Elias finished. "And right now it's listening. If it's making a choice, we need to make sure it hears us." Ilara hesitated, the enormity of the task weighing on her. Then she nodded, her hands moving quickly to link her equipment with the artifact's glowing surface. The patterns shifted again, their rhythm synchronizing with her touch, and for a moment the tremors subsided. "Connection established," she said, her voice trembling, "but I don't know how long I can hold it." Elias stepped forward, the weight of countless lives pressing down on his shoulders. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, the sound of his breath filling the silence that had fallen over the room. "This is Commander Elias Vahn of Earth," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "I don't know if you understand words or if you even think like we do, but I need you to hear this." The artifact's glow brightened, pulsing in time with his words. Elias felt the vibration through the soles of his boots, like the steady thrum of a heartbeat. "We are not perfect," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's triumphs and failures. "We've made mistakes. We've fought wars, destroyed what we shouldn't have, and lost more than we've ever deserved. But we've also built, created, and endured. We've loved, we've hoped, and we've fought, not just for ourselves, but for the future we believe in." The artifact's hum deepened, the light now casting long, flickering shadows across the lunar surface. Ilara's equipment sparked, warning of overload, but she held firm. "You may see us as insignificant," Elias said, his voice rising. "But we are not. We are here, and we refuse to be erased. If you have the power to destroy us, then you also have the power to understand us. So I'm asking you, not as a soldier, but as a man who believes in the people behind him, give us that chance." The artifact pulsed once, twice, then fell still. The silence that followed was absolute, as though the entire universe had paused to listen. Ilara's breath came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling as she stared at the now dormant device. "It stopped," she whispered. On the Ardent, Aiden let out a shaky laugh, though the tension in his body hadn't eased. "Did it work? Did we just talk our way out of annihilation?" Before anyone could answer, the artifact released a final pulse of light, brighter than any that had come before. It raced outward, its energy enveloping the system. The tactical display flickered, showing the remaining Aroxan fleet frozen in place before disintegrating into nothingness. The light faded, leaving only the stars behind. Elias exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging as the weight lifted. Around him the crew erupted into cheers, their voices filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. But Elias didn't join them. His gaze remained on the holographic display where the artifact's energy signature had vanished completely. "We survived," Ilara said, her voice breaking the silence. "But I don't think it's gone." "It's not," Elias said quietly. "It let us live. That doesn't mean it won't be watching." He turned to his crew, his voice firm and clear. "We sent a message today, not just to the Aroxans, but to the galaxy. We will fight for our survival, for our future, and if they come again, they'll know exactly who they're dealing with." The stars outside the viewport seemed brighter now, as if the darkness had relented, if only for a moment. Elias stood tall, his reflection etched in the glass. The artifact had made its choice, but so had humanity, and this time the universe would remember it. "Since you chose war," he said softly, the words heavy with finality, "prepare for the consequences."